Hello, everybody. We are here with Brian Caloris. Brian was the campaign manager for Seattle City Councilwoman Kshama Sawant back in 2019, and he is currently on the Kshama Solidarity Campaign to defend her against a recall election that is underway right now. I was very honored to co-host a telethon for Kshama back in May, hosted by our pal, or I should say, put together by Kshama Solidarity in coordination with our pal Lauren Steiner, and that was a great time. But I wanted to get back in touch with you guys and do something as the recall date drew nearer, and so that's what brings us here. So, Brian, thanks for making the time, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's just get right to this. What is this recall about, and why is it happening? We'll just start there because I think a lot of people are. I think there's been a lot of vagueness around the very question of what this is and why it's happening.
Yeah, so this recall is because big business and the right wing want a do-over because Kshama keeps defeating them and our movements keep defeating them in election after election. Last time Amazon tried to buy City Hall, they put $1.2 million into a corporate PAC and they were defeated. So now this is the new move. And the move is to have a low voter turnout election in December where the ballot itself will have just straightforward lies on it, a bunch of dishonesty on it, and that's how people will vote, yes or no, on recalling Kshama based on that ballot that they see. And it's not just that it's a special election in December, it's a special election 1 month after a mayoral election, and it's a mail-in ballot. So December 7th is the election date, but you get your ballot right before Thanksgiving. So this is another form of voter suppression, and the charges that will appear on the ballot are an attack on the right to protest. So this is what we see the right wing doing all across the country, voter suppression and attack on the right to protest. But of course, in Seattle, they can't straightforwardly say that it's just a right-wing Republican initiative. They have to hide behind something else. So we need to tell it for what it is. And when we look at their donors, it's clear what it is. It's a Republican, right-wing, racist initiative that's an attack on the right to protest and on the left.
Okay, so when you say attack on the right to protest, are you referencing the charges that have been brought against Kshama that are sort of the quote unquote basis for the recall?
Exactly. And so Kshama hasn't been found guilty of anything, didn't break the law. There's no criminal charges against her. She wasn't allowed to testify in court. Yet the way the ballot's going to appear is as if she's guilty of all these things, some of which are just completely untrue. So the charge of the three that the recall campaign likes to talk about the most is a march to the mayor's house. So what they're saying is Kshama led a march to the mayor's house, which was a protected address. Kshama doesn't know where the mayor lives and did not lead a march to the mayor's house. Kshama, like 20 million of the rest of us, probably including you guys, went to the Black Lives Matter demonstrations in the summer of 2020. And this particular demonstration is important because Kshama was asked to speak by the families of victims of Seattle Police Department violence. The Seattle Police Department is notorious. 6 of them participated in the January 6th Capitol attempted insurrection, the Coors Light push, as I like to call it. And so
that's good. I like that.
So it's just a lie, and it erases the people who actually led the march, the victims of SPD violence, but it's going to appear on the ballot as if it's truth. And Kshama is proud of the role that she played in the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, not only with this march to Jenny Durkin's house, but also with the City Hall protest that also appears on the charges. I don't know if you want me to get into the City Hall too.
Sure, yeah, get everything out there that you need to.
City Hall, the protest in City Hall that Kshama did lead, was also an organizing meeting to talk about next steps for the Black Lives Matter movement. And it helped breathe life into the struggle. At a time when on the streets in Seattle, people were being tear gassed over and over again, a chemical weapon that affects your respiratory system while there's a respiratory disease going around that the cops were using. Kshama led a protest away from the tear gas into City Hall at a COVID-safe event where everyone's wearing masks, hand sanitizer, etc. And it talked about organizing in the next steps. I think it's also symbolic, although this was not a symbolic action, it's symbolic of a larger process that over the last 8 years, Kshama's office has opened City Hall to protesters, to oppressed people, to working class people. Whereas before, City Hall used to just be completely owned by corporate lobbyists who would literally meet with politicians the week before they voted on the budget to tell them what to do in the budget. And so this organizing meeting talked about the next steps for Black Lives Matter in Seattle at a crucial turning point where there was a lot of repression. And one of those next steps was to fight to pass legislation that banned the use of crowd control weapons by police and ban the use of chemical weapons by police. This is, along with many other things in Seattle, this is a first in the country of any major city passing this type of legislation. And with all these firsts, from the $15 an hour minimum wage to taxing Amazon to landmark renters' rights, it was the combination of a determined movement and Kshama's council office that was able to win this victory. So again,
now the core of their claim there with the protest at the city council is that the building had been closed because of coronavirus. Isn't that what they're claiming? That she opened it up to protesters when it wasn't supposed to be open because of coronavirus?
Well, yes, but again, that's warped because the governor's measures had not the type of regulations we're used to now about indoor events, et cetera, et cetera. And the main thing is there was City Hall business going on other days, but she opened it after hours.
I see.
Was another thing. And Kshama opening City Hall to protesters and working class people while they're being tear gassed by police is you know, it's another sort of symbol, but it's not just a symbolic thing because it actually helped win this victory against chemical weapons and crowd control measures by the cops.
Well, you know, it's funny. I was watching an interview that Kshama gave to Brianna Joy Gray, and Brianna made this point, and I'm glad that she made this point before I did, because if she hasn't been kicked off the internet, that means I guess I won't be either. But she said, you know, I mean, you referred to the January 6th riot as the Coors Light push, which is a very, very good phrase. I think I like the ring of that. But Brianna said, look, as much as you want to maybe condemn that specific event because of the specific motives behind it and the specific rationale behind it, Brianna said, I do envy their balls a little bit. You know what I mean? I do envy that spirit of like, we're taking over this government building. This is the people's house and we're coming in. You know what I mean? And so, you know, not that there's a direct parallel to what Kshama did with the protesters, but there's that revolutionary spirit there that, you know, is very much lacking on the left. You know, the left, as Russell likes to say, it's a movement of hall monitors very much. You know what I mean? You know, at a certain point, yeah, you might have to get into a little bit of trouble.
Yeah. You know, obviously the difference is if the left is trying to storm the Capitol, demanding taxing the rich, demanding a higher minimum wage, demanding, you know, a socialist Green New Deal, the cops won't stand aside for us, right?
Yeah, well, that's a great, I mean, that gets to it right there, because exactly. The January 6th rioters didn't bludgeon the cops to get to the building. They screamed and yelled until the cops stepped aside and let them in.
Yep. But absolutely, I agree. The left has become far too tame recently. And, you know, we shouldn't be mourning over war criminals like Colin Powell. We should be proud to make enemies. And that's why we have this recall. A lot of, you know, people on the left, when they get elected to office, don't use it to build determined movements nearly enough. And I think they're well-meaning when they get in, but they're often proud of the friends that they make. You know, Pramila Jayapal talking about how great Biden is. Well, we should be proud of the enemies we make when we use our elected office correctly. And we're proud of the donors, the Amazon executives, you know, the top Trump donors, the union busting billionaires, the slumlords that are always after Kshama and are behind this right-wing recall. Because if you're not making a lot of powerful enemies, if you get elected to office, then you're not doing your job right. You're not mobilizing working class and oppressed people the way you should be.
I agree 100%. I mean, the only two candidates I've lifted a finger to help elect in the past 5 years have been Bernie Sanders and Kshama Solidarity. Both are independents. Or Kshama's not technically an independent. She's with the Socialist Alternative Party, which is a third party. And so I do want to ask, while we're on the topic of the enemies she's made, get into a couple of specifics about how she made those enemies, right? In terms of tax Amazon initiatives, rent control policies, the $15 minimum wage. I mean, she really turned that issue from a quote unquote pipe dream to a very achievable reality. She was the first to do it, really. She led the charge to make Seattle the first major city in the country to pass that wage.
Yeah, and that's why when it spread across the country after being passed in Seattle, that's what the ruling class is afraid of with tax Amazon. Because if you look at every city across the country, there's a major housing crisis. And every city you live in has some corporation that people really don't like. It may not be on the scale of Amazon. It may not be on the scale of Jeff Bezos like it is here in Seattle. But taxing a big corporations in order to alleviate the worst aspects of a housing crisis in a city, this would be extremely popular, the same way 15 was. And they really don't want that to spread. And so that's why, in 2019, they poured in all this money to try and get rid of Kshama. Now, the Amazon executives are not being as brazen as they were a couple of years ago because it backfired on them. They've been trying to hide the last few months, but the recall was having a hard time raising money. So in the last couple of weeks, finally, Amazon executives weighed in. They weighed in with, it's almost like ridiculous who they had donate to the recall campaign, but it's their head of global real estate and their head of charter schools, along with someone on Bezos's elite S team, right? So these are some of the enemies. But then in real estate, some of these landmark renters' rights, I don't want to go into all of them to get into the sort of legislative weeds enough, but I think a couple clear ones we can all understand is you have to get 6 months notice from your landlord in Seattle if you're going to have a rent increase. I know there are many times in my life I would have benefited from that. But then even more.
Now, just to be clear, you guys, you don't have what we have in New York, right? You don't have rent stabilization.
No.
They can raise it whatever they want.
They can raise it whatever they want. But then this next measure, along with the 6 months notice, I think is important, and I'll get to rent stabilization, rent control. But the next one is 6 months notice. Then if they do raise the rent, they have to give you 3 months assistance, right? 3 months rent to you if you can't afford to stay there after they raise the rent. So that helps a ton of renters. But the thing that they're also afraid of, just as they're afraid of the 15 spreading, Amazon tax spreading, is rent control with no corporate loopholes. That's what we're fighting for. It's the hardest thing to win out of all of these things because how much the corporate real estate lobby controls local politics. It's usually not Amazon weighing into local politics. It's not McDonald's weighing into local politics. Right. It's corporate real estate interests. So it's really hard to win rent control. And we've been building that movement for a long time. And for the first time, and we think this has something to do with the timing of the recall, for the first time this month, Kshama is going to be introducing actual rent control legislations without the corporate loopholes that we see in New York or San Francisco that have whittled away rent control so that they can create these fake horror stories about who has rent control and who doesn't and try and undermine the authority of the legislation, but rent control with no corporate loopholes. And this is why they're afraid of her. This is why they can't stand 2 more years of having a Marxist thorn in their side in City Hall.
All right. Now, on Marxism, now she has said of Millionaires Row that the houses there should be converted to rentals or public housing. When things are exquisitely beautiful and rare, they shouldn't be privately owned. Does she have any legislation to that effect? So essentially, she wants to take kind of old houses that are presumably built by very wealthy kind of robber barons, and she wants them to be given over to the public good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of things in a socialist program that we need to popularize and fight for. But then what you're able to actually bring for legislation are the things that are going to be popular enough that a movement can be built around that can actually force the hands of the establishment, right? So unlike many others on the left, they'll often just limit what they try and popularize to what can be won legislatively, and they don't have a movement building approach. We need to popularize things like taking over the houses of the robber barons. We need to popularize things like Boeing, one of the biggest corporations in the area, should be brought under workers' control in those factories. Same goes for Amazon as well. We may not be able to legislate that under capitalism, but those need to be demands that we popularize while we're building those struggles that people will actually mobilize around. And so that doesn't mean our demands can't be far-reaching in the legislation, and rent control with no corporate loopholes is about as far-reaching as it gets in this country for housing policy. But we also need to popularize a socialist program for instance, these problems we face, environmental destruction, institutional racism. You think we're going to be able to get rid of these things without getting rid of the capitalist system, root and branch as a whole? It's utopian to think we could. So we need to be able to popularize, dare I say, a revolutionary program to actually win the full change that we really need.
It's extremely refreshing and inspiring to have a conversation like this with people who have actually backed this rhetoric up with action that actually won, right? Like most of the time we talk about these things, it's like, yeah, it would be nice if we could do that someday. But Kshama's campaign is unique in that, like, you guys are winning. You guys are winning and you guys are making this change. And that's actually a very good point. It really comes down to like leading versus lagging indicators, right? Like, for example, one of the first interviews we did when we started this show a couple years back, I interviewed a prison abolitionist. And I thought, okay, well, she just says no jails whatsoever, right? We're not locking anybody in a cage for any reason at all. And you hear that and you think, well, that sounds a little bit too much, like we need to put murderers somewhere, right, to keep them away from everybody else. But then, you start talking about the crime bills of 1994 as a presidential race heats up, and you start talking about this. And then I interviewed a friend of mine from our local DSA chapter here in the Hudson Valley region of New York. And he says, look, you might not be a prison abolitionist, but those abolitionists are the ones who open up a space for us to come in here and say, okay, maybe not no prisons at all, but it really puts into perspective how drastic a measure it is to lock someone in a cage and keep them away from society and keep them away from their family. And should we do this unless we absolutely have to in the most extreme cases, right? Like, and once you think about it that way, you think, yeah, because so many people in this country just very casually toss around the idea, oh, yeah, this guy should be in jail. Oh, he should be in jail. Oh, this, the guy in the Haggard the Horrible helmet at the January 6th riot, they're talking about putting him in jail for 5 years. And people are like, he should be in jail for 10, 20, 25. It's like, what are you, fucking nuts? What are you, fucking nuts for occupying a building? You're going to lock the guy in a cage for what, 10 years of his life for doing that? Like, what are you, fucking insane? I mean, I would say 90 days for him if I were handing out the sentence. But anyway, the point is, rather than get into the weeds of that, the point is they open up a space for you to say, hey, wait a minute. How crazy is it that we're locking all of these people in cages for years and years and years and years and years? And the same idea sort of applies to what you guys are doing. Yes, we have to push a quote unquote radical platform in order to build movements and open up spaces to then have the legislative efforts be the lagging indicator of that. Right. If that makes sense. So like we set the marker here as commandeer these nice houses and take them over and make them sort of public buildings. And then the lagging indicator of that is rent control measures, right? Because that's the legislative effort that can be won once you set your sights halfway further down the field, if that makes sense, what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think
Sorry, I went on too long there. I realized now.
No, I think it's a good point that we shouldn't limit what we have to say just to where the current discussion is, because our job is to raise consciousness. Our job isn't to just worship where consciousness is, but we need to raise it about what needs to be done. And what needs to be done is quite a dramatic transformational thing here and around the world. When we look at the crises all over the planet, whether it's inequality, environmentalism, food, various forms of oppression, women's struggles, etc., we need transformative change internationally, right? And we should never hide that. But it's a question, how are people going to get there? How are we going to convince people to get there? And a large way of how people learn en masse is they engage in movements. So then the question is, what can mobilize people into struggle? And it's not these piddling little things like, oh, I wish the appropriations bill was a little bit this way and that way, and this politician and that. People zone out with that stuff, It's what's going to affect their material conditions of their lives, higher wages, stop letting the cops kill people on the streets, have a better house, etc. But those things are not easy struggles to win because of the powers that are up against us. If they were easy to win, we'd have them already, So we're going to need to build that movement, and people learn through movements. Who are your enemies? Who are your friends? And they're often surprised by a lot of it. Recently, in Washington State, we had a carpenter strike as part of Striketober that's going on right now. And some of these rank and file workers, construction workers, they're Trump supporters. But they felt like their union leadership wasn't fighting for them. Kshama was out on the picket lines with them. I was out on the picket lines with them. We have some construction workers in Socialist Alternative who are out on the picket lines with them. And they say, I never expected to be at a protest organized by you guys. And now the strike's over, but we're fighting for parking for construction workers, fighting for legislation for parking for all construction workers. And now you have people who were Trump supporters, going to public hearings and denouncing the city council for not fighting for parking. You've got a study group on Lenin's State and Revolution popping up among some construction workers, And it shows that what can be done when people begin fighting in their own interests. And that's where we have to never be hiding what we're fighting for and have that ambitious program to change the world, but then be thinking about what can mobilize people into action, because people learn through that process as well.
Well, you make a couple of interesting points. One, I'm sure you're aware that there's a faction of the left, and I'll put air quotes around that would tell you basically anyone with a red hat is damaged goods, and you should not be working with them. Which I feel that's essentially a corporate media narrative that certain people have absorbed. This idea that we're all at cross purposes, and they spread that kind of confusion. So I wonder if you got any of that kind of pushback if you were making common cause with avowed Trump supporters on an issue. Did you get any pushback like that?
Yeah, there was posing by some people in the labor movement who claim to be super woke, but have less in common with the workers that they're supposed to represent than they do with management. And the thing is, we worked alongside two-time Trump voters, but it doesn't mean you don't challenge them on things. We wouldn't accept a second of misogyny or immigrant bashing on the picket lines. We would challenge it. We may challenge it in a more patient way than some others on the left, but we would continuously challenge it as part of a discussion about how to bring this struggle forward, who their friends are and who their enemies are. And there's obviously a difference between a Trump supporting construction worker and a Trump supporting boss or a Trump supporting politician. That's a different thing there, because once you have a class analysis of society, it opens up those conversations in a more meaningful way.
Well, that's what I fear. You have certain people on the left who don't understand that, and they don't want to allow those conversations to take place, as if those conversations are verboten, which makes absolutely no sense. If you're trying to win an ideological struggle, you want to persuade people, don't you? I mean, that's the whole deal, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Persuade people to join your side.
I mean, we're going to point out ruthlessly that Trump's biggest donor, who's also the biggest evictor in Seattle, is a donor to this recall campaign and maxed out to it. We're going to show that they're right wing and that they're racist by attacking the Black Lives Matter movement, you know? And we need to get that out there because people's consciousness in Seattle, they don't know that the corporate Democrats, because the Republicans in the area have nothing else to donate to, they're donating to the corporate Democrats, right? So how do we expose those corporate Democrats? We expose them by showing the people who are actually behind them and pointing that out. But that doesn't mean you take the same approach of pointing out your class enemies, like people like the George Petrie, the biggest Trump donor, Martin Selig, the guy who's the landlord for the ICE building that's detaining immigrants in Seattle. Like those are our class enemies, and we are gonna instill hatred among Seattle's working people and even some middle-class liberals about those right-wing backers of the recall. And the working people who are attracted to right-wing populist ideas, we need to challenge those ideas in a patient and effective way that brings out the class nature of why they're attracted to them. You know?
All right. Now let me ask you a related question, because I'd be fascinated to get the response of somebody who's on the front line of this fight. Now, I was a wee tot, but I was kind of in the epicenter of what I call the escape from New York phase in the 70s. And anyone who was conscious at that time, it never left them. Now, we've discussed this on the air, and I think I actually included an article. My fear with defunding the police is, okay, you're in a position where you have a multi-generationally abused working class, and you have all of the accompanying pathologies that come with generations of poverty. Now, the police are there essentially to suppress the completely understandable and reasonable reaction to lack of opportunity and living in a kind of pressure cooker of unfairness, and essentially segments of society that are poor, I think across races, live in a police state in ways that people who are not impoverished in that way don't understand. They have no concept that they live in a completely different country. Now, if you lift the police without also taking that money and diverting it into UBI and such, you are going to have, in all likelihood, an uptick in crime with which reactionary forces are going to use to discredit your entire project. And I mentioned the 70s because that kind of a cycle, in my estimation, was very much a part of what got us the Reagan Revolution. So how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think the defund police demand, when it came out of the mass uprising in 2020, could be a concrete thing that people could fight for, because a lot of these police budgets, I mean, it's military style equipment and things like this that have nothing to do with walking the beat in, you know, the neighborhood that I live in, which has a ton of homelessness, a ton of crime, et cetera, et cetera. And that was something we could point to, but defund and go where, you know, and defund and by how much. What Kshama was saying was in the height of that movement was defund by 50% to give money to affordable housing, to a union jobs program, a Green New Deal union jobs program. Whereas a lot of the way it was put forward in a lot of places was just abstract, was just, you know, defund police, end of sentence.
Right.
And also no plan for how to actually fight for it. It was just a slogan. And And that's part of the fact that there wasn't an organized and clear plan coming out of that amazing uprising that was so life-changing and confidence boosting for so many people, I think is part of what's left space for the right-wing backlash now. And this recall is part of that racist right-wing backlash. The 81 bills against the right to protest around the country introduced by Republicans is part of that racist right-wing backlash. And it shows the crucial element of in our movements, too many of our movements, especially in this period compared to like the 1970s, which you talked about, they're often explosive and episodic, and then what's left afterwards to get organized in. I have friends in Minneapolis. Black Lives Matter signs are in every neighborhood, Justice for George Floyd signs at every house. But what do you actually go to in your neighborhood if you want to continue the fight against racism? There's no organization to go to. You know, there's these nonprofits who don't do very much. But what grassroots organizations can people get involved in? And I think also it's not just the weakness of the defund demand where no concrete things were put on it, but it's just that there was so much space for this racist right-wing backlash because people didn't get organized enough out of that movement. And I think that's something we need to talk about, is how we need stronger unions, but also a new party in this country. And I hope that DSA could be part of that process, pointing in that direction.
Well, you know, like I said earlier, you guys are winners, and that's why, you know, it's just so inspiring to talk to you, and that's why I try to do what I can to you know, help you guys get through this recall. And so we'll do whatever you guys need us to do. Just definitely keep in touch. But before we sign off, tell people how they can get involved, how they can donate, and if they're in the Seattle area, how they can, you know, put some feet on the pavement and volunteer.
Yeah, first on the if you're in the Seattle area, how you can volunteer. We're going to need the biggest get out the vote operation ever, because this is a December 7th election. People are going to get their ballots before Thanksgiving. It is by design. They had enough signatures to do this recall when everyone votes for the mayor. They're not doing it. We're going to need the biggest get out the vote operation ever. We've already had 500 volunteers who have participated in this campaign. We've got over 3,000 in-district donors. We're going to need more people to step up. Voting's not going to be enough. We need folks to contact your friends, to donate to the campaign, and to come out. If you're not ready to knock on doors, we've got plenty of other stuff you can do. You can hang up posters, etc., phone bank, text bank, but we need your help. It's going to take more than voting to win this one. It's a huge uphill battle. So the website, Kshama Solidarity, there's a K in Kshama. KshamaSolidarity.org. KshamaSolidarity.org/donate is how you donate. The maximum you can give is $1,000. Tons of people on the other side are giving that $1,000 or $2,000 for a couple. And their top professions, because you have to say what you do for work, are the top professions of the other side are corporate executives working in real estate, corporate lawyers, managers. This is their top donors. Our top donors are tech workers, teachers, and construction workers. Those are our three employees for top donors. So we really need that help. And it's not just the recall that we face, that we're actually out fundraising, because we're a fundraising juggernaut and we break records every time around. It's well known in Seattle, but it's these corporate PACs, and they always come in at the last minute. And because of what happened in 2019, we think it's going to be even more at the last minute to try and sneak under the radar, because Amazon took a hit for how they came in 2019. It damaged their reputation, not only in Seattle, but across the country. But they already have $600,000 in a corporate PAC that's aimed mainly at us. There's going to be a heck of a lot more of that. So we really need you to step up and donate. We've got donors from all 50 states and, of course, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. So we need y'all to step up and help fund this fight, because this is important not just for Seattle, but the victories we've won here have spread across the country. And also the example. You don't have to kiss up to Margaret Thatcher's ghost or Colin Powell's ghost, if you want to call yourself a socialist in office, you can unapologetically fight for working class people and make the type of enemies who are carrying out this recall. We should be proud to do that. And it's necessary that we do that if we want to build the type of movement that can change the world.
Absolutely. Brian Caloris, thank you so much for making the time. Good luck. Godspeed. Let us know if there's anything else we could do to help between now and then.
All right. Really appreciate it. Great to talk to you guys.
Thank you, Brian.